All right, everyone. Welcome back to the Psych and Theo podcast. Sam and Tim here, and we have been busy. This has been a busy season for Tim and I, but we are pushing through, getting these episodes out, and we have a really interesting topic today. One that I think is going to enjoy. It's kind of like a two-part series, and Tim is going to illuminate our minds with this very interesting topic. It's been a topic of discussion as of late. And yeah, we're excited for you guys to tune into this. And as always, we want to encourage you guys to follow us on Instagram. That is at psych_and_Theo on Instagram and also on Facebook. And also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you can, leave a review. That's so helpful. We enjoy reading what you guys have to say about the podcast. And also, when those of you guys who are listening just see us, whether it be on campus or want to reach out and just kind of give us your thoughts on future episodes. So we have a couple of topics that were suggested and we're working on that now. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's topic. So Tim, today we're talking about UFOs and the Bible. It's something that I thought we would probably never talk about, at least for my part. I've never really been interested in the paranormal. This was part of the intrigue as you brought up the topic. I'm like, okay. So I think I'm going to have some questions that will come up as we have our conversation. But you've been reading a lot of books, and this has been something, I guess, I don't know if it's been trending, but definitely a topic that you've had with a couple of people, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that's trending. And this is really a space that I'm very much interested in, not from a standpoint of I'm a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, but I'm very interested in the emerging new religions of the world. There's a term. Tara Burton is the researcher who coined this term, and it's from her book Strange Rites, RITES. She coined this term remixed religions, and it's essentially this new trend of people mixing and matching different concepts from different religions to make their own worldview, essentially. Okay. And if it sounds crazy, that's because it is, because it doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be coherent. It's just people mixing and matching things. I mean, there's religions forming around Harry Potter, for instance, and she goes into that.
Actual established religions?
Think of them more like
Scientology, stuff like that?
No, not that established. Think of them more like online communities.
Okay, which I can see.
Sort of that nature. In fact, she says that the internet has been the catalyst for a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Of people forming first this online community that morphs into a religion-like entity. You know, with the UFO space and aliens and all that stuff, there's been a lot of stuff coming out, a lot of disclosure stuff from the government. But the interest in UFOs and aliens and all that stuff has really ticked up a lot. With it comes questions about worldview, questions about, does Christianity have room for aliens and extraterrestrials in the Christian worldview? You know, would that change things about Christianity if tomorrow ET showed up and said, I'm from another planet and I'm a rational agent just like you guys? You know, what do we make of stuff like that?
Yeah.
So there's lots of those questions coming out. I think with the advent of the internet, social media, and everyone's got a camera, there's more and more weird things being captured, weird phenomenon being captured. So it's not just hearsay. There's real video evidence of quote unquote paranormal things happening. That's not fake. Of course, certainly there are fake things. Yeah. But there's things that are unexplained or that at least don't fit within like a naturalistic paradigm where you can't explain this through the laws of physics. And so demands a further explanation or an explanation from a different worldview. All right. So where do you want to begin?
As always, let's go ahead and define our terms. I know we're talking about UFOs and maybe what the Bible teaches on that or what the Bible perspective is on that. Let's start there. UFOs. I don't know if aliens going to be part of this one, but maybe what that even means.
So a UFO, the term stands for unidentified flying object. That term has sort of fallen out of parlance in the modern vernacular and has been replaced with another term called UAP, and that stands for unidentified aerial phenomenon.
Okay.
So you can see the difference there. A UFO is an object that's flying and it's unidentified. But a UAP is an unidentified aerial phenomenon. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's an object. It could just be light source or something like that.
Okay.
So you'll hear people nowadays say UFO, UAP together.
Okay.
But yeah. So I think when it comes to this issue of are UFOs real, are aliens real, there's lots of questions we could start with. But I think when it comes to are UFOs in the Bible, we've been forced to answer that question by the modern culture, or by contemporary pop culture, especially with shows like Ancient Aliens and other things like that, which everyone likes to make fun of now, and rightly so, because it's kind of a crazy show. But there's a tendency now in our modern age, because of this UFO category and our fixation with aliens and sci-fi, to read into the scriptures or to at least to take a second look at stories in the Bible through the lens of the UFO worldview, which is to say, looking at accounts in the Bible that are described as being miraculous, described as being divine encounters of some sort, divine visions, and seeing those as not as supernatural divine visions, but actually as alien encounters. That's what we're dealing with here. So when someone asks the question, are UFOs in the Bible? Or they say, did you know UFOs are in the Bible? This is what is happening, is that they're reading the Bible through this modern lens. So the most famous example is in Ezekiel. Ezekiel has a vision of a wheel within a wheel. Don't have time to read these passages because they're quite lengthy, but this is Ezekiel chapter 1, I believe, where Ezekiel basically has this vision. Now, those of you who don't understand, Ezekiel is an exilic prophet. He's not one of the minor prophets. He's a major prophet, let's say, and he's part of the community that is exiled out of Jerusalem. So he finds himself in captivity with the Babylonians. And he has this vision. He sees this incredible, glorious, like angelic figures. And then he sees what he describes as like this vehicle of some sort. And it has like wheels, and there's wheels within wheels. He's talking about lights around these wheels, and there's eyes everywhere. And it sounds kind of crazy. Like, wow, like what kind of creature does he see? And people have in the modern era read this through the lens of a flying saucer. And so they say, if you read this through a flying saucer lens, like you see, maybe this is a flying saucer, then it starts to make sense, because you have a wheel that's a saucer, maybe a wheel within a wheel. So maybe there's like concentric circles to this saucer. And it said it has eyes all around. That could just be lights all around the ring of this UFO. So Ezekiel doesn't really know what he's seeing. He's just describing it in terms that he understands, but it's really probably a UFO. That's how this argument goes.
Interesting.
Another example would be the pillar of fire and the pillar of cloud that the Israelites are led by in the wilderness out of Egypt, that it was really an alien presence that was leading them in some sort,
Yeah.
There's nothing to go on except speculation there. Another interesting one is Jacob's ladder. That's Genesis 28. Jacob has this vision where he says he sees this stairway up to heaven, and the angels are ascending and descending on this stairway. Jesus later alludes to this image and says that I'm basically that stairway. I'm the way to heaven. But what Jacob sees, he describes it as a stairway or something like that, and these angelic beings going down and up on this thing. And people have read that as that Jacob doesn't understand what he's seeing. He thinks it's like a vision of heaven, but it's really probably a UFO spaceship of some sort. And there's beings, alien beings that look like angels coming down and going up into the spaceship or something like that,
But see, that's so interesting, because you've alluded to that fact of if that's your worldview or that's the lens that you're using, you're going to see that. But I would have never, ever thought that. But again, that goes back to what's the lens that a person is using to interpret these passages, which I'm sure you'll get into.
Yeah. There's some other examples we could get into, like Paul's vision in the book of Acts, where he encounters Christ on the road to Damascus. And the way it's described is that Paul sees a light and he hears a voice, but the people around him only see a light. They don't hear a voice. So they don't know what's going on.
That's right. Yeah.
And Paul is blinded temporarily by this thing. And modern UFOologists will say, see, this matches the descriptions of a UFO encounter: a bright light, hearing noises or telepathic speech, and being temporarily wounded. Sometimes people are wounded when they encounter UFOs. And that's actually a really strange phenomenon with UFO instances. There are things like that, which in the next episode, we'll get into some of the religiosity side of UFOs. But
Okay.
one more would be Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6, where Isaiah sees the throne of God. He was in the temple and he sees the throne of God, the majesty of God, and these angels around the throne. And he's just completely undone by this. And again, an angel picks up a hot coal and touches his lips and things like that. So people say, look, Isaiah's putting theological language on this, but it really matches some UFO encounters. It's still some of the similar aspects to how people describe UFO encounters today. What I've laid out for you is essentially what Ancient Aliens does, the show,
And I
is that
haven't
they would
seen it,
look
but
at these passages like the Ark of the Covenant that has a couple artifacts inside the Ark of the Covenant. And if anyone touches the Ark of the Covenant, they die. And so they were like, well, maybe the Ark of the Covenant held some radioactive material that was given to them by the aliens that was leading them through the pillar of cloud and fire. What do we make of this? Well, for one, there's a major problem here, and that is that these readings are anachronistic. The term anachronism means that you're reading your contemporary understanding and worldview into the worldview of an ancient text. And that's a big problem.
Is that similar to
because
eisegesis?
it's a form of eisegesis.
Okay.
Eisegesis is like a big umbrella term for these types of things, but essentially you're taking your understanding, your modern understanding, and you're reading that understanding into the text.
Mm-hmm.
And furthermore, it's not allowing the text to speak for itself.
Yeah.
So it really is essentially saying that no, these ancient authors aren't allowed to say what they mean, or what they said isn't really what is true. Like they're not allowed to actually say things as they are. We have to now reinterpret what they say. So that the texts aren't allowed to speak for themselves. Instead, we're assuming, or at least this worldview is assuming, that our beliefs in the modern age, this belief in extraterrestrials, this belief in aliens and spaceships and sci-fi, like that worldview is more credible and quote unquote scientific than the religious worldview of ancient people.
Mm.
That's an assumption. It's like, yeah, our world, we know so much more about the world. Ancients weren't that smart. We understand so much more about aerial phenomenon and flying and spaceships and all that. They couldn't understand those things. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to read our modern understanding back into this text. I think it's a big problem because, and we can get into this in the next episode when it comes to worldviews and religiosity and what might really be going on here, is that if I assume the Christian worldview is true and that what's really going on with aliens isn't actually extraterrestrials, but it's spiritual in nature, then what the ancient texts are describing actually may be what they saw. Mm-hmm. And that there wasn't flying saucers because that might be a modern phenomenon put forward by deceptive entities to deceive a modern age.
And that's how it works all the time, right? Like the more it sounds like with time and we have supposedly more understanding of something, we try to use that new understanding to interpret past events, right? Yeah. And especially when it comes to scripture.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's always a problem. Like another problem I see is when it comes to like the story of David and Goliath. Here's an example as an aside. The story of David and Goliath, explaining how Goliath was who he was as this reportedly 9-foot tall giant with armor that weighed hundreds of pounds, too heavy for a regular man to carry. How could someone like that exist? Like physically, that doesn't seem possible. Well, people explain that one of two ways. Well, one, he may not have been that tall. And that two, well, he might have had this genetic deformity or genetic malformity called gigantism, where it makes someone really tall and they got 6 fingers and 6 toes and they're really deformed. The problem with that, and I hear Christians say that a lot too. The problem with that is that people with gigantism aren't built like warriors.
Right. I was just thinking that.
Yeah, they're not built like the physique of a Greek god that can take on 10 men, and just kill them all in one swoop.
Right.
Goliath is described as this mighty warrior who is very fierce and strikes fear into everyone. Well, people with gigantism don't necessarily do that.
Right.
So the passage is not allowing for us to just read our scientific understanding of like what a medical condition is into that
Mm-hmm.
story. Goliath, and I like what Hugh Ross says here, that if he really is 9 foot tall and he's built like a warrior, we know from our human physiology that's not possible in a naturalistic worldview. So there must be something supernatural going on there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that gets into the whole worldview of where does Goliath come from? Where did the giants come from? And if you guys want to know about that, you can listen
Definitely.
to one of our previous
Yeah.
episodes when we get into spiritual warfare and where
Mm.
demons come from and all that stuff. But yeah, that's an example of where we mistakenly read something back into the text. We're reading a modern medical discovery back into the text as though that explains everything about that text.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a good
Yeah.
point.
So another problem with reading like UFOs back into the Bible is that modern people think that's more respectable, like that worldview is more respectable because it fits within a naturalistic paradigm.
Yeah.
Naturalism meaning that there's nothing outside of nature, there's no supernatural stuff, there's no gods, there's no spirits or anything like that. So what we see in the sky, if it really isn't fake and there really are like things in the sky, well, then they must be extraterrestrials. They must be from another planet, or they must be from some sort of like different place in space and time from us. But it all has to fit within a naturalistic paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so if so someone will see this and say, well, look, we see this modern phenomenon that is perfectly compatible with my naturalistic worldview. So when I see these ancient texts who don't have the same worldview, they have supernatural worldviews, and we know that's false. So we'll just read back into these texts a naturalistic explanation,
Yeah.
ergo UFOs or something like that. Now, some
Right.
people will read, they'll explain these events in naturalistic terms, like, no, they didn't see angels in the sky, they saw ball lightning or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. There's certainly people who do that who don't go to the UFO route, but the people who use the UFO explanation tend to do so because they are naturalists in some way. Like they're
Sure.
trying to make this fit within a naturalistic paradigm.
That's interesting though, because they have to find like a balance between the naturalistic world and then making sense of this thing that seems very unnatural or not, not part of this earth, like these UFOs or these UAE sightings that they have. That seems unnatural. So I'm just trying to wrap my head around how do they make sense of that, of those two things.
Yeah, I mean, some of them posit that like there's other dimensions, or
Mm.
they're or like maybe these are highly advanced species that have
Mm-hmm.
figured out all kinds of different travel and anti-gravitational and stealth cloaking and all these other things. Like you can posit all kinds of things that this advanced species is able to do that looks magical to us, but
Mm-hmm.
might be perfectly reasonable once we understand it physically.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
just a quick question on the visions of these prophets had. How do you determine whether it's something that they saw or if it was an actual vision that no one else was able to identify? Meaning, are you saying that both the vision and what they saw are real? Or are you saying that it was like a dream type of vision in their mind? Because just thinking psychologically here, for people who are expose themselves, for example, to movies that are satanic or movies that are about extraterrestrials or anything like that, like they'd be more prone to believe news like that. Bigfoot, right? For example, they'd be more prone to believe that if that's what they're consuming content wise.
Oh
So
yeah. Yeah.
I guess I could kind of make that explanation for modern day today. But in Bible times, how do you distinguish between it's something that they actually saw or if it was a vision?
Well, I think the context is going to determine that.
Okay.
Sometimes prophetic visions are simply that, they're visions. Like
Okay.
that someone, it's like a dream state or something that only the prophet sees.
Mhm.
Other times it's not just a vision, it's a miracle or an appearance where
Mm,
other
yeah.
people see it as well.
Okay. Mm,
Maybe here's an example. I can't remember the passage because I'm thinking of this off the top of my head, but Elisha the prophet is with his servant, and there's an army that comes to surround the city foreign army, and they're here to destroy the city, and they want Elisha, the prophet of God. They want to take him back because they don't like him. And his servant's really worried. And so he tells the servant, go outside and look and see what you see. And Elijah prays to God, Lord, open his eyes so that he may see. When the prophet's servant goes out, looks over the hillside, what he sees is an army of chariots of fire. He sees the army of the heavenly hosts that are there to defend the city against this foreign army. So that's something that this servant is allowed, that's actually there, but the servant is allowed to see it, prior to which he wasn't able to see it. But Elijah asked that the Lord would allow him to see that. So that's something where it's there, but you can't see it in most cases. Something like Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6, that seems to be a vision. It's Isaiah is allowed to see something. He gets an appearance of the throne of God and what it's like around the throne of God. And this gets to my second point, the second problem with the UFO readings of Scripture, is that they almost always neglect the theological argument that's being made by these passages. They just thrust that aside and they just read into it that this was a UFO. They ignore the theological context in which these visions are described. If you just rip these stories out of their context and imagine like you're reading a newspaper and it's like, Isaiah went to Jerusalem and Jeremiah, well, he's locked in a pit here. And Ezekiel said he saw something strange. We don't know what that's about, but let's move on. And it's just like random factoid stories. You might think, oh, okay, that's kind of weird. But no, this vision that Ezekiel has is the start of the book. And it is setting up the book of Ezekiel, the prophecies that he gives. And the point of that vision, so let's just get back to Ezekiel's, where this wheel within a wheel is described, and this eyes everywhere and all that. What Ezekiel is describing is a royal chariot. Michael Heiser he's a biblical scholar. He has a great article on this. If you just Google Michael Heiser, Ezekiel's chariot or Ezekiel's wheel, and he has several articles, and I think he has got some podcast episodes on this where he basically explains why Ezekiel's wheel is not a UFO. And he goes into great detail about how this is a royal chariot that Yahweh, the God of Israel, is riding as a king would ride his chariot into battle. And it's meant as a polemic against the Babylonians who have just captured Jerusalem and think that they're in charge and their gods are in charge, that Marduk is in charge, and that Yahweh's dead and he's nowhere. This vision is a polemic against that, saying that no, God is still in control. God is the one who is all powerful. And no matter what army or no matter what empire thinks that it's in control, you're not. God's in control. Same thing with the Isaiah's vision in Isaiah 6. It's the year that Uzziah dies, the king, and there's a lot of chaos. There's a lot of uncertainty. And Isaiah sees this vision of God on his throne. He's in control. He's still the one who sets up empires and kingdoms and appoints kings and disposes of them. He's the one that's in control. So that's the theological messaging. Jacob's ladder. Jacob sees this vision. People think, oh, well, it's a flying saucer and guys going up and down on the saucer. No. Notice that Jacob is describing this stairway that goes up and down to heaven. And if you understand the ancient Mesopotamian worldview, these stairways were connected to ziggurats oftentimes. So a ziggurat is like a pyramid type structure with stairs on all four sides. And at the top of the ziggurat was usually a temple where they would offer sacrifices and they would call down the gods. And so the gods, it was meant to mimic where the gods would reside on top of mountains. So a ziggurat, think of it as like a temple where the gods would reside at the top. And so the stairway going up and down the top of the ziggurat was the way to go up and down to God. Okay. So it would make sense for Jacob to see angels going up and down this stairway. What he's describing, how an ancient Mesopotamian would understand that as Jacob sees this cosmic mountain that symbolizes a ziggurat, and at the top of that mountain is God. It's heaven. And the angels are coming to and fro from earth to heaven, back down.
That's good. That makes sense.
So all that to say, when for Christians, and I know we're just really touching on this very briefly, but when you hear these arguments, whether that's on the Ancient Alien show, which I don't think is around anymore, I don't think it's on the air, or you just hear people talking about it now, because now where this conversation has shifted, it's shifted into podcasts on YouTube and other places where people are talking about there's UFOs in the Bible, there's aliens in the Bible. All they're rehashing the same old arguments over and over again.
So this has been something that's been ongoing.
Oh yeah, for a long time.
Oh wow. Yeah, it's funny how it just kind of resurges after whatever amount of time. But yeah, I don't think I've ever heard all these arguments. I'm just genuinely interested now to what they're proposing.
Yeah. So I think for believers, if you hear things like this is how to combat it. Like, okay, one, there's a naturalistic worldview that's being assumed. Like our modern understanding is more scientific and more credible than the views of the ancients. Why would that be the case? Why should we accept that at all? Why would we not let these texts speak for themselves? Just because there's similarity in terms of phenomenon doesn't mean that these ancients saw UFOs.
Yeah.
Secondly, I would say this, here's where these two views are, there's some agreement or concurrence, is that there are historical accounts going back thousands of years of people seeing strange things in the skies. Not just in the Bible, but outside the Bible as well. There's a Catholic researcher by the name of Jacques Vallée who's written lots of different books on this subject. And one book in particular is called Wonders in the Sky. And it's a study on like hundreds of accounts going back thousands of years of people seeing strange phenomenon in the sky. So the modern phenomenon of people seeing weird things in the sky is not new, but our language around it is new. The language of ascribing aliens and, it's a saucer, it's a spaceship and all these things. But I would caution people that that's language that we have assigned to this stuff. And part of that is we're not being perfectly objective in how we use that language, because we're influenced by science fiction literature. We're influenced by Hollywood. We're influenced by modern technology that we ourselves have invented.
Yeah.
So just because we see things in the sky that mimic that stuff doesn't mean that, one, it must be advanced alien tech that we're seeing that's naturalistic, and two, that is the same as what other people have seen in ages past.
Right. Because I'm thinking that what they're describing, there's no corroborating evidence that that's what other people have described, or is there? Right? Like if someone describes seeing something in the sky, it's a similar explanation or similar description that someone else has used.
Yeah.
And I think what the message that you're communicating too is that we got to go back to text, context, right?
Yeah. And, I would say this in a worldview like ours, where we posit that there are entities that are at least non-material in some respect, who are nefarious and who do not have our best interest at heart, but they have capabilities to deceive in this way as well. And so a naturalistic worldview doesn't account for that. A Christian worldview does account for that. And if we can't just examine a UFO, and I know some people are going to say like, well, we got them in Area 51, you just got to go. Like I would challenge anyone, like, let's just stick to what we know, not to what we hear, not to what some anonymous whistleblower or some guy that is on a YouTube channel says. Just stick to what you know.
Yeah.
So, so Jacques Vallée, his book Wonders in the Sky, I've not read it, but I've read summaries of it. It's actually on my reading list to get to this year. Another one is called Passport to Magonia. That's another book of his. Magonia is like another word for heaven. I don't know where that comes from, but essentially it's a book about how people have started to talk about UFOs in terms of transcendence and taking us to heaven in some respects. He did a lot of research on UFO cults. And particularly the Heaven's Gate cult. And what's so fascinating is that Jacques Vallée did this research in the 70s and 80s before, and I don't know, I imagine he's probably updated his research because he's still alive, but the Heaven's Gate cult, if you remember, do you remember
I remember that.
With the Halley-Bopp comet in the 90s? was
Mhm.
flying over the earth and everyone could see it. And they believed that there was a spaceship either on the other side of that comet or within it that
Yeah,
was there to take them home. And so
that
they
was
committed
wild.
mass suicide.
Yep. How
Yeah.
many people were there? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I don't remember how many
Yeah,
people there
but
were.
yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, that was a big deal. I remember that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
So Jacques Vallée was doing research on them.
Okay.
And as a UFO cult.
Wow.
So they were attributing things in the sky to aliens, and the aliens were the ones that were going to take them to heaven. And so that's what the passport Magonia is about, is like that phenomenon coming about. Yeah. So I would say this also: the naturalistic worldview can't explain all the accounts that we see in history.
Hmm.
Here's an interesting one. This one's always puzzled me because I want to go back and find the original sources to see if this is corroborated by more than one source. But in 1453, the Ottomans have surrounded the city of Constantinople, and they're about to take the city. It's a dire straits. It's like the day or two before the city falls, and it is reported that this bright light appears over Hagia Sophia, the cathedral, the big cathedral in Constantinople that today is now called the Grand Mosque
Mm.
of Istanbul. And it's reported that this bright light appears right over the top of the dome of the cathedral.
Hmm.
And the whole city sees it, all the armies see it, and it puts this great fear in everyone. And then the light kind of ascends up and goes away. And people interpreted that at the time
Mm.
that either the Lord's presence was leaving that cathedral or the angel that was guarding the city left the city. And basically, like God was kind of abandoning the city at that point. It's reported in the historical documents that this has happened. So I think
Mm.
it's a really strange thing that happens. Now, moderns look at that. They're like, well, it was clearly just ball lightning. Lightning appeared above the cathedral. But to my knowledge, no one has ever shown like that there's been other instances of ball lightning appearing over that cathedral. And
Hmm.
what would be the odds of that happening right at that moment, like
Hmm.
right at that time period? It just seems really strange to me.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
maybe there's someone out there that's done the research I'm not aware of. I'll admit, if they've done that research and yeah, ball lightning appears every 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay, but
Mm.
that's an instance where something really crazy happens
Yeah.
and everyone sees it, but it's really inexplicable.
Yeah. I mean, so how do you feel about it? Like knowing what you know, hearing something like that, and then is that like, well, it's not too far fetched to believe, or is
Yeah,
it like,
well, are you asking for my personal opinion
yeah,
on what that
yeah,
was? So this is pure speculation. This I
sure,
know that I hear me out. It's just pure speculation.
yeah,
I think it probably was an angelic appearance of
mm,
some sort that at some points like I do think there are angels that are given authority to guard certain things. And I think that again, don't crucify me because like this is just
yeah,
speculation, but
right, yeah,
it does seem to me that at least the idea that there was an angel there that appeared and then left, that is certainly plausible within my worldview.
sure,
That there was
sure,
sort of a sign of like the city's done,
hmm,
and it's going to be overrun.
yeah. Well, here's why I asked for your opinion on that, because I think if there's anything that I've been learning through our time together, podcasting, the episodes that we've been doing, but specifically the ones that we've been doing on the spiritual realm, you've really opened up my eyes to see that as more of a reality. Because I think the way that I grew up, it wasn't something that was talked about enough. Like spiritual warfare, like it was used as this kind of it's battling against sin, which it is. But I think the reality of understanding that this is always going on around us and not bringing an awareness to it makes you vulnerable in some ways. So that's kind of been my perspective as we've been talking about these things. You've just kind of opened up my worldview a little bit more to be open to it at least, right?
Yeah.
Because there is a resistance to it. Like UFOs, why are we even talking about this thing? Like that would be an initial reaction to that. But when you integrate how people view this in light of the scriptures and how they view today's worldview into that, it makes it interesting. It makes you consider it. So I just wanted to throw that out there because even when you shared that, you said it falls in line with my worldview, that it could be a possibility, right? So again, it just goes back to what filter are we using as we interpret these events? So it's been helpful for me.
Yeah. So just as a closing comment, I would say Christians don't dismiss like reports of UFOs and things like that. Don't just outright dismiss it as like, oh, it's all just a bunch of hokey stuff. Because I think there is a deeply spiritual element to what's going on.
Yeah.
But also don't buy into everything you hear, because there's fake stuff all the time. There's hoaxers, there's misinformation and disinformation. I mean, that's one of the more nefarious things in this subject is that governments are interested in keeping secret their weapons and new tech and things like that. So they like if they think, oh, people are getting a little too close to figuring out what we're doing, they are more than happy to introduce false stories and fake whistleblowers and things like that to just further confuse the conversation. And we'll get into that in the next episode with some of the research that's been done by a woman by the name of Catherine Prusolka. She goes into this a little bit too, how this whole subject is a morass of misinformation and disinformation. So it's really hard to know what's true and what's not. And I think that in of itself should clue Christians into this is not a harmless subject, because there are people who are very much interested in not having the truth discovered.
Right. It almost seems like the new shiny object that's being discussed in Christian circles, where it makes it appealing and it's very easy to just kind of go with it and say, oh yeah, it just opens up this whole new space for them, which could lead them, if they're not biblically grounded, to, I don't know, I guess fall into the UFO religiosity. I don't know.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's like any subject that is weird and interesting, intriguing, but it could take you away from your primary responsibility, which is to grow in holiness and follow Christ, and to take the gospel to the world and other things like that. It could take you away from that.
Yeah.
It's not that it's not important to know and be informed about these things, but it's not the priority. And so many people, they get so fixated on it and they become kind of weirdos. And that's putting it mildly, but they actually can ruin their life.
Yeah.
They get so obsessed with it, becomes an obsession. And I think I would just, anyone who's thinking about studying this stuff, just ask yourself this: at the end of my life, when I stand before the Lord, how am I going to give an account of myself? Like if I stand before the Lord and he's like, why did you spend the last 40 years tracking down UFOs? Yeah. Like what good was that to do? It's like, now if I'm trying to help people who this gets to another subject. Let's maybe go to the next episode and we'll talk about religiosity. But like if I'm a pastor and I have people in my congregation that are like, I had a UFO encounter. I had an encounter with aliens. If I'm a pastor or if there's pastors listening, you should not immediately dismiss that as crazy. And maybe we'll leave with that and go to the next episode.
Yeah, that sounds good, man. Yeah. Well, thank you for educating us on that. And for those of you guys listening, subscribe to the podcast and tune into the next episode where we talk about UFO religiosity. See you then.